Howdy, folks. Welcome to week 6. This week we're going to be going over human digestion. It might be worth it to go back and review your cellular respiration stuff, as it's going to be pretty relevant. But as we've already covered this in week, I believe it was 3, we're not going to go and hit it again during this presentation. We will have 2 recordings available for this. So there's going to be the recording that I'm making. Then I'm also posting a recording from a different professor who taught this class a few years ago, 5, 6 years ago. They shared their video resources with us on the condition that we do not contact them because they find it annoying. So, just don't try to reach out to them and you'll be fine. We do also have a study guide, a paper study guide listed that was designed around her video. So if you want to go and have like a flow chart for that, you can work through that. Now with that, so I actually have a pretty heavy background in animal nutrition. And I did a lot of dairy nutrition, reptile nutrition, diet design at zoos, things like that. So I'm weirdly well qualified to teach this one. So with that, let's get right into it. So share screen. All righty. So here we All right, so the digestive system and nutrition. So in this presentation, we're going to be talking about the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract. We're going to be talking about specialized compartments for food processing inside of the body. We're going to talk about the nerves and hormones that are relevant to digestion. We're going to go and talk about how you can go about planning a healthy diet. That's also part of the discussion assignment for this week as well. Just start trying to localize your thought processes. Think of yourself every day. You should wake up and think, I live in the Central Valley and I am surrounded by the Central Valley culture. So how should I work within that to go and live my best life? Right. It's a holistic approach. And then we're also going to be talking about nutrients, and we're going to talk about how to interpret food labels, as the food label system in the US is designed to be slightly confusing to try to encourage you to buy certain goods. So the digestive system and nutrient. Oh, and we're going to talk about energy balances, and then we're going to talk about some eating disorders. The more common ones that people know about, and then some new ones that you might not have heard before. Now, the purpose of the GI tract is to break down complex organic molecules into smaller subunits that can be absorbed into the bloodstream. So in previous weeks, we talked about the polymers and the monomers, how we have a polymer chain making a really big molecule and is composed of repeating units of a monomer. Like for a nucleotide, your DNA, it's a nucleic acid. For a protein, it's an amino acid. For a carbohydrate, it's a simple sugar. These are the smaller subunits that are being broken apart. Now, the GI tract can be separated into the tract itself, which is like where the actual food is going to be sitting, like the bolus that you swallow when you go and eat something. And then the accessory glands. And these add secretions to the digestive tract to aid in digestion. But they do not actually have the material of the digesta inside of their compositions. The lumen of the digestive tract is what we call the inner area where the food is actually going to be sitting. So the first section of the GI tract is going to be the mouth. So that's your pharynx, your esophagus, your stomach, your small intestine, and large intestine. Now, this is fascinating because mammals as a taxa are very unique in how hyper-specialized our teeth are. Like we have most other animals that have teeth, every single tooth is identical. But because we have specialized teeth, we are capable of having a much more diverse diet. We are capable of eating significantly faster. That's where, like wolfing down your food, like a wolf can actually put down 10 pounds of food in like 3 minutes. It's so that they don't get their kills stolen from them. But the point is, and we also can process food into different forms. You're not going to see a lizard that can successfully crack open a Brazil nut, but there's a lot of birds that can do that. You're not going to see a lizard that's like a very generalist omnivore that can like work its way into a garbage can to eat garbage because they don't have the right teeth for it. So that is one of the more interesting traits about us. Now, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine compose the entirety of the tract itself. You start at your mouth, you end at your butt, right? This is that visualized. So you see here, we enter at the mouth. You have salivary glands, which are secondary organs, adding enzymes and water and things that just help break down starch, really. And then here you have your pharynx separating your food that separates your esophagus from your mouth. Your esophagus itself, just a muscular tube full of peristaltic motion. It doesn't actually do any digestion. And then the stomach, intestines, and other accessory organs. This diagram is probably going to be one of the more useful ones for studying, I'd say. Now, the walls of the GI tract can be divided into 4 categories. So firstly, we have a mucosa, which is the innermost mucus secreting tissue. So this is going to be saturated with specialized cells for secreting mucus. These are things like goblet cells, which secrete mucus, as well as cells that will secrete like enzymes and things like that. Then we have the submucosa, which are the support system for the mucosa. This is like connective tissue, nervous tissue, blood, lymph, everything they need to function are being provided by the submucosa. The muscularis is underneath this, and it is a double layer of smooth muscles. So laid contradictory to each other, like against the grain. So if my fingers are the strands of muscle fiber, first layer goes like this, second layer goes like this. And this allows the digestive tract to be capable of extremely flexible movements. And this is how it's capable of the peristaltic action that's going to be steadily moving food through the digestive system. The stomach is an exception because it has a third layer of musculature, which is designed to churn the stomach to help mechanically break down food. So anything that isn't quite broken down is going to go and be rolled and mixed. Finally, we have the serosa, which is the outermost. This is a form of epithelial tissue, and it is supported by connective tissue to the rest of the body cavity. So here's just how that's all visualized. Here you have your mucosa, which is actually interacting with the food, the chyme. Then we have the supportive networks of blood, lymphatic, and nerve vessels. The muscularis, you see how they're contradictory in grains, so that makes it more flexible and also allows you to do peristaltic motion. And then the serosa, which lubricates the outside of the GI tract and makes sure it can smoothly slide over all your organs. Like if you've ever gotten like your upper lip stuck to your gums, imagine if that happened with your lungs and your stomach. It wouldn't feel very good. It would hurt very badly and might kill you. So it's important that all your organs are well lubricated from the outside within the body cavity, as well as on the inside, to allow them to do what they're doing. So with any sort of process, we can think of adding things to a system as adding energy to a system. So if I have, let's say I start with raw corn, I start with dried feed corn kernels. So there are a couple ways that I can break it down. I could chemically break it down. So I'd go and like take the corn and I'd subject it to a bunch of enzymes. I could mechanically break it down. So I would crush it into small digestible pieces. I could break it down with heat. So I could go and cook the corn, or I could also go and do a combination of all three by boiling the corn, by grinding the corn into a paste and then boiling it into water. Your digestive system is capable of following very similar processes. So mechanical digestion is done primarily by the mouth. This is when we are biting and chewing things into pieces. Now, this is a mammalian trait. Again, this isn't something that you see outside of mammals. So for other taxa, mechanical digestion tends to occur further in the digestive tract. We also will go and continue mechanical digestion in the digestive tract because we will go and be active, our stomachs will be actively churning to digest things. Chemical digestion, however, is the main mechanism of digestion for humans. So we are releasing enzymes constantly from our salivary glands, from our digestive tract, everywhere to go and help metabolize and break down complex molecules into their baser subunits. This chart just describes the structure, whether it's involved with mechanical digestion and whether it's involved with chemical digestion. So starting at the mouth, the pharynx, but choose things to pieces with your teeth, mechanical, digestion and carbohydrates with salivary amylase, chemical. Pharynx and esophagus, just there for transport, don't do anything. Stomach, churning, enzymatic digestion. Small intestine, extended peristaltic motion to go and stir everything up. And then chemical digestion, specifically carbohydrates, proteins, and fat. Emulsification occurs here. By the way, peristaltic motion is just the action of like a tube of muscle. Like, let's say this pen is like my esophagus. As the muscle will go and contract a band after a band after a band after a band. And in doing so, it's going to go and create kind of a smooth, undulating motion that's going to go and steadily pass things through the length of the tube. Large intestine doesn't do any mechanical digestion, but fermentation is carried out by bacteria. This is super important in hindgut fermenters. So that's like your horses, kangaroos, tortoises, and not very important for a meat inclined omnivore like us. Our digestive system is very similar to a bear or a dog, in that we're designed to be able to eat both plants and meats, but we have to go for higher energy ones because we are incapable of getting all our nutrients from fermentation. Cattle do fermentation in their foregut. Horses do fermentation in their hindgut. This means that cattle have a large specialized stomach and horses have a large specialized large intestine or colon. This is the only way to break down cellulose, by the way. Cellulose has to be digested by bacteria. We cannot digest it ourselves. And then finally, you have the anus. That is just the waste disposal. However, a large amount of water reclamation happens in the large intestine and in the rectum. So this is in part why this is how we avoid losing water over the course of digestion, as we're adding a lot of water to turn what we're eating into fluid. It's super important because our taxa originally evolved inside of desert and grassland ecosystems. And we also thermoregulate through sweating more than any other species. This means that any step that we can take to conserve water is a very good step. So here are the digestive organs, again, aided by several accessory glands. So we start the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, stomach, large intestine, small intestine. Mechanical digestion, transportation, chemical and mechanical, absorption mainly, along with some chemical and mechanical digestion, fermentation, fermentation and water reclamation, as well as some vitamin reclamation. And then under there should be the anus, which just says waste expulsion. So that's what all the main organs do. These are the organs that are actually part of the tract. These are the organs that will at some point contain the food. Now we go here, aided by several accessory glands and organs. These never are in direct contact with the food. So this would be like your salivary glands, which give off amylase, which is a type of enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates into sugars. Your pancreas, which helps you metabolize sugars and also fats. Your pancreas is going to contain the tissue that controls your blood sugar level. So if you get diabetes or sugar and your blood sugar goes up, your inability to deal with that is because your pancreas is not working right. If your pancreas is working right, it will release insulin. They'll tell your cells to absorb the sugar, lowering your blood sugar to a tolerable level. Or if you're starving, then your pancreas will say, hey, release the sugar from inside of the cells so that we have some sugar to work with. Then you have the liver. The liver does everything. It filters, it adds enzymes, it removes enzymes. It's an incredible organ. It is the organ that has the most diverse function in the human body, I would argue. Then you have the gallbladder. So the gallbladder stores secretions from the liver. The liver secretes, one of the many things the liver does is secretes a chemical that is known as bile. And bile is what is known as an emulsification agent. So typically we know that water and oil cannot mix. Fats and water want to stay separate. However, if you think about it in culinary terms, there's a lot of times where we mix something with water in it with something with oil, and then we make it smooth. Good example is mayonnaise. Like when you pour in the oil, the eggs are mostly water, so they're going to stay separate. But once you start to blend it, it becomes one giant cohesive unit. This is known as emulsification, which is any process that allows fat to bond to water. So what we do when we're making mayonnaise is enzymatic emulsification. It is chemical emulsification because there are proteins inside of the egg that help emulsify things. And then also mechanical emulsification. You are just beating the hell out of the fluid so much you're forcing air in between all the molecules to act as an intermediary. The gallbladder stores the bile, which performs the emulsification function for your digestive tract. Without a gallbladder, it's incredibly hard to digest fats. They mostly just pass through without actually being absorbed, and leads to pretty extreme diarrhea and a lot of water loss, and it can be lethal. This is why gallbladder surgery, you have to be very militant about your diet after and avoid the majority of fats in your diet. Unemulsified fats. Your dietary fats you can still get from things like mayo. That'll be safe. Right. Mouth, oral cavity. So the first part of the mouth is going to be the roof of the mouth. This is the palate. Towards the front of the mouth, it's hard and reinforced with bone to go and protect your sinus cavity from whatever you're eating. But towards the back, which would be the back of your throat, it's presumed that your teeth have already managed to kill whatever you're trying to eat and have broken it down into safer size chunks. So instead, you have a soft palate behind your hard palate, a flexible, soft separation between the back of your sinuses and your throat and the roof of your mouth. It's very flexible in order to go and aid with swallowing. If it was rigid, you could only swallow things that were hyper-specific sizes, and they would tend to get stuck more often. It's like the comparison between trying to force marbles out of a tube sock and trying to go and force them out of like a cardboard milk box from the bottom upwards. So the soft palate is muscular and it prevents food from entering the sinus cavities when you're swallowing. It also aids in starting the swallowing action. That's in part why it's so heavily muscular instead of just being a barrier. It also is flexible enough to allow the sinus cavities to drain down the back of the throat. That is a natural process. It is happening all the time to everyone. And it is good because this is also in part how our sense of smell works. That constant drainage allows you to interface with your taste molecules in the back of your throat to go and help process smells. It's been shown that individuals that have had that what's known as the post-nasal drip ended lose all capacity for smell. It's interesting. Now, the mouth begins mechanical digestion and chemical digestion, and this is also where food moderation comes on. There's a lot of reflexes to make you spit up something if it doesn't taste right or feel right in your mouth. There's a lot. This is also the point where you start processing it with your teeth for the rest of your digestive tract. Yeah, incisor. So your front teeth are called your incisors. They're designed for clipping and slicing, usually soft vegetation. Canines are designed to puncture and tear, and molars are designed to crush. Now, the majority of the modern diet is processed in such a way that we primarily have a diet that requires crushing and not much slicing and tearing. But if you do a lot of home cooking and if you've ever like overcooked a steak and made it like tough, you'll notice the import of each of these tooth groups. We managed to step aside a lot of them, but they still have their purposes. Interestingly enough, part of the reason why teeth tend to be crooked in a lot of first world nations, but straight in a lot of third world nations, is because less processed foods help to keep your teeth straight as they're growing. So if you give your kids something to chew on all the time when they're young, they're probably going to have straight teeth when they grow up. It's important to think about. Like I'm on a Invisalign here, braces here, so it's something I'm rather invested Now, above the tooth, you have above the gum line, a tooth has what's known as the crown. Below the gum line, it has what's known as a root. And the gum itself can be referred to as a gingiva. So gingivitis is a disorder of the gingiva. It is basically gum disease. Now the teeth has three layers. The innermost layer is the living layer. And it's called the pulp. So that's going to be a mixture of blood vessels and nerves, and is going to be providing nutrition and sensory information to the rest of the tooth and from the tooth to the rest of the body. Then you have dentine, which is hard bone-like and porous. So it's kind of like spongy bone. It's like rigid, but it has a lot of holes in it to allow fluid to go and flow from the pulp through the dentine, providing it with nutrients. Now, covering the crown of the tooth is a non-living structure known as enamel. Enamel is hyper rigid, but it does shatter and it will demineralize, and it cannot be repaired if it's removed. So one of the reasons why we have so many tooth issues is originally evolutionarily, we were kind of designed to die around the age of 40 so that we stopped competing with resources with our grandchildren. The idea being there was a 20-year generational interval where we kind of evolved around a family structure where grandchildren, there's going to be like 3 generations living together. So the best thing that could have happened evolutionarily was you died before you hit 40, because then you're not competing for resources with young people. But this has become detrimental in a modern society because people tend to live past 40. So our teeth aren't designed to last that long. And in part, that is why we have to have such rigorous oral care. We have to be very careful about how we take care of stuff, because your teeth are designed to just be able to keep you eating until you hit 40. We're trying to make them last without looking bad until you're 80. It's a different problem, but it's part of why oral hygiene is so incredibly important. Here's the anatomy of the tooth. Here you can see the blood supply coming through the bones of the jaw. You can go and see the dentin filling up all the empty space, the enamel crowns, and then here you can see the pulp in the center that's going to be the nerve and blood supply for the rest of the tooth. And these are the different categorizations of teeth. In the front, you have your incisors, then you have your canines, premolars, and molars. Grinding, penetrating, killing, honestly, traditionally, and cutting. Now, tooth decay can occur for many reasons. The main thing that damages teeth is acid, which is problematic because a lot of foods, especially in the Western diet, and especially our sweets, like our candies, have very high amounts of acid. In a more traditional diet, tooth decay instead tends to go and come from sugar and rotting material getting trapped between the teeth or under the gum line or over the surface of the teeth or ground into the surface of your molars. And then as those decay, they're going to be producing acid that's going to go and destroy the enamel and eventually cause a cavity. Covering the entire layer of your teeth is a thin, slick, kind of shiny layer of bacteria, mucosa, and food particles. And this promotes tooth decay. If you've ever seen on a dog or a person with really bad oral hygiene, like tartar buildup, like large yellow deposits over the course of their teeth, that is the plaque. That is just what the plaque turns into when it's been given enough time, when it's not been disrupted. Typically, the bacterial life cycle will not start producing acid until about 18 to 24 hours after you brush your teeth. So that is why it's important to try to brush every 12-ish hours. And if you can't manage that, it is super important to go and do it at least once a day. Gingivitis is a disorder of the gums that can develop into periodontitis, which is inflammation of the teeth. So the gums, very delicate system, but very resilient, will heal up pretty quickly. Once you get periodontitis, that is the actual, like, let's have a look at this anatomy. That is going to be infection of this mucosa all the way along the gum line. And it's also going to start infecting the spongy bone underneath. At this point, they pull the tooth because if you get an infection in the bone of your jaw, it will most likely kill you. And if you're lucky, they'll just have to remove a couple square inches of jawbone, which you really don't want to happen. So brush your fucking teeth. Okay? Now, the salivary glands and chemical digestion, we got three pairs. We have a sublingual glands, which are below the tongue. We have the submandibular, which are kind of back here, like in the back of the mouth. And then you have the periodontid, which are directly in front of the ears, a little higher. Now, the salivary glands release moisture in the mouth. Water is a universal solvent, so it's going to go and be breaking down those chemicals pretty quickly. And mucus to help bind the food together into a single unit so that it doesn't like powder up and go into your sinuses and things like that. Salivary amylase is an enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates into simple sugars. You have amylase released inside of your saliva and it starts to break down starch into sugar. It's a fun experiment to do is if you take a piece of popcorn, pop it in your mouth and just hold it there for like as long as you can really tolerate it, you'll start to notice it getting sweeter and sweeter as your salivary amylase is breaking down the starch into sugar inside of your mouth. So here you have your parotid gland over in the back. It's kind of covering the outer edge of the jawbone. This is in part why getting hit in the corner of the jaw hurts so freaking bad because this is also hyper innervated. Then you have the sublingual gland. That's going to go and be like right here, like underneath the lips at the base of the jaw. And then you have the submandibular, which is going to be tucked right here. Like when your lymph nodes swell up, when you're sick, they're directly above this. Now the tongue allows you to taste and manipulate food. It is in there in large part to do two things. One, help get the food to the teeth to grind them into a paste, and two, evaluate the food to make sure that it is something that should be eaten and not something that should be discarded. It's a very large skeletal muscle. For our taxa, it's super important in speech and verbalization. If someone loses their tongue, they pretty much can't speak anymore. Movement, well, there are exceptions. There are certain languages that actually don't use tongue movements, but they're kind of rare and you can't really go, and no one else is going to be able to speak it. Now, so I've been referring, now, after your food has been chewed, it is formed into a bolus, which is a soft mass of food, and it will be called a bolus as it goes through the rest of digestion. Taste buds are designed to help you monitor the content of food to make sure you're not eating anything that's going to kill you or waste your time eating something that's not nutritionally worth it. Your pharynx is going to be shared by your respiratory and digestive systems, and your pharynx is a mechanism that's going to ensure that you do not inhale your food. It is an organ. It is, however, a muscular system, which means it is subject to muscle relaxants. So, a lot of famous people who OD'd on heroin, like Carrie Fisher, what actually happened is, so heroin is is a muscle relaxant. So what happened is they vomited in their sleep or they had active salivary glands for whatever reason. And because they were, unconscious because they're on fucking heroin, and their pharynx was relaxed by the muscle relaxant qualities, they aspirated those fluids and drowned. So this also is an issue if individuals have strokes that can have paralysis of the throat. If you've ever heard of solid water, that's usually people having to go and drink solid water instead of being able to drink normal water. That's usually a byproduct of a disorder of the pharynx. Swallowing has to be an active involuntary component, in part because it forces your brain to process whether you should be putting this in your body or not. Now, the rest of digestion is involuntary and reflex based. So the soft palate will move to go and prevent things from going into your sinuses. Your larynx is going to move up to go and start the transportation process. Your pharynx is going to go and move. Your epiglottis is going to cover your glottis. And at the end of the day, a lot of stuff is going to be happening. Here's a kind of documented back here. So we got a hard palate, the soft palate at the back. Here's our tongue. Tongue goes down much further into the throat than people tend to expect. And this is the action that's going to be happening as we swallow. So here's our bolus, and the soft palate's going to flex to protect the sinuses and temporarily close the postnasal drip. The tongue is going to go and push towards the roof of the mouth, and then the front of the soft palate's going to descend slightly, while the back of the throat moves slightly, and that's going to go and start forcing the food into your throat. Now the esophagus is going to go and be transporting food from the pharynx to the stomach. This is going to involve peristalsis, which is a rhythmic wave of smooth muscle contraction, and it's going to move food along the GI tract. There's no mechanical or chemical digestion occurring in the esophagus. It is just getting stuff from the sensory center to the digestion center. This is how peristaltic motion kind of works. It's just rings of muscle contracting one after another to go and slide something along the tube. Again, it's like forcing a sock through a marble through a sock. Now, the stomach is a J-shaped sac. It has bands at the top and bands at the bottom that are capable of contracting and completely enclosing the stomach, known as sphincters. Every single band of muscle that can go and block up, so that can close up completely, tends to be classed as a sphincter. You have some in your respiratory tract, a lot in your digestive tract, some in your reproductive tract. There's a lot of sphincters in a human body. This is important because the stomach is a site of, acid production. If either of those sphincters start to go and get damaged or fail, it can cause extreme issues. Like if you have acid reflux, that's the sphincter at the top becoming slightly weaker. And anytime you're having like an acid attack, that's because that sphincter lets some acid up into your esophagus and it started to feel like burning in your chest. You could go and handle this in large part by just take antacids whenever it happens immediately. Your boy used to have gastric ulcers from hyperacidity. I pretty much lived off of Tums. I ate like 2 or 3 of them with a meal, and it worked. Now I'm better. So, take care of yourself. Pay attention to your body. Heartburn is so the top sphincter is known as the cardiac sphincter, and that leads to the gastric reflux, or my mom always called them the ERPs. It's just those little burps, the little bit of vomit in the back of the mouth, and the burn and pain associated with heartburn. Now, the wall of the stomach has 3 layers of smooth muscle. We have longitudinal, circular, and oblique. This is to aid in the muscular churning action of the stomach. Stomach is food storage. It lets you quickly store your food until you can get to a safe place to go and rest and digest. It liquefies food to form what is known as chyme. So chyme is just the food that's already been partially metabolized. Once it leaves the stomach, it is called chyme. The lower sphincter also regulates the chyme release to the small intestine, like the rate that it should let it through. And then we also begin chemical digestion of proteins in the stomach. So we're going to be releasing a lot of enzymes called proteases that break down proteins into amino acids. And then, of course, the stomach churning is mechanical digestion. Now, the stomach has a lot of glands that are going to go and be secreting chemicals into the internal lumen. So the first type of cell that secretes things are the parietal cells. These secrete hydrochloric acid, so HCl. That is designed to kill bacteria and viruses, break down connective tissue in meat, and also it is the perfect pH for the function of the enzyme pepsinogen, which then becomes pepsin and is capable of breaking down protein into amino acids. So the enzymatic action is the main mechanism of digestion. The pH of the hydrochloric acid allows the enzyme to function. And then the pH also has a byproduct of killing bacteria to go and help protect us. Humans have a much more acidic digestive tract than many other animals. And in part, this is because we have a much stronger immune system than many other animals. We have been selectively breeding ourselves to live in bad hygiene, high density systems for about the last 10,000 years. All right. Now, the parietal cells also aid in vitamin absorption. So they secrete what is known as intrinsic factor. And intrinsic factor causes certain bacteria that live naturally in the stomach to thrive. And then those bacteria to start releasing B12, which is an essential vitamin that we need for our digestion. So the parietal cells are also cultivating good bacteria along with killing bad bacteria with acid. Now, we also have the chief cells, which secrete pepsinogen. Pepsin, which is the activated form of pepsinogen, is activated by the acid and then it breaks down proteins. We also secrete gastric lipase, which is it's an enzyme designed to break down lipids or fats. So this also starts fat digestion. Now, the mucal cells of the stomach secrete mucus, which in turn is designed to protect the lining of the stomach from digestive enzymes and HCl. So my ulcer issue only ended about a month ago, and it was mainly stress induced. But typically, what ulcers are is the mucal cells lining your gut lose efficacy in certain regions, so you have patches without mucus, and your stomach starts to digest itself, and this is what forms an ulcer. This can come from many things. There are bacterial infections that do it. H. pylori is the main cause for ulcers, and it's passed around through the poor hygiene practices. But it also can be induced by stress, or a bad diet. Here you can go and see all the layers working together. Something that's worth emphasizing is you see the sheer amount of surface area that the surface epithelium has. This is designed to help increase the rate of nutrient transfer just by increasing the surface area as a ratio to the volume of the object. This is known as the square cube law, and it's something that is a key principle to biology. So mucus contains what's known as a buffering agent, but this buffering agent is mainly going to function to neutralize acid that starts to bond with it. So this mucus is saturated with bicarbonate. So bicarbonate is baking soda, and it's designed to and it neutralizes acids very effectively. But interestingly enough, if mixed with a very strong base, it will start to neutralize the base. So because bicarbonate tries to make acids more basic and bases more acidic, we call this a buffer because it can help regulate the pH of a substance. It will go and keep that pH where it needs to be no matter what's going on. Now, given that your stomach is responding to constant influxes of food and water, an adaptable buffer defense system makes a lot of sense. So the precursor, like pepsinogen, can be referred to as a zymogen, and that is just an enzyme that is being secreted in an inactive state. Once it's activated, then it becomes an enzyme. Zymogens are the precursor to enzymes. All right. So other than just defending from the acid, acid release is correlated to input of food, in order to go and help make sure that you're not putting in too much acid and overwhelming the defenses of the stomach. Yeah. Food absorbs and dilutes the gastric juice, which in turn protects our stomach. Now, the stomach lining is replaced incredibly rapidly, like every 3 days or so, because this is not a perfect system. Damage is still going to be occurring. So you just need to replace those damaged cells as they're being damaged. Whenever someone has a disorder of the digestive tract that leads to ulceration, it is usually just whatever forces balance to go and keep a stomach intact in a normal person. One of those is out of balance, and their lining cannot keep up with the damage that's being done, often by a very narrow margin, however. There are incredibly tight junctions between the cells and between the sphincters to avoid leakage. Hydrochloric acid is not something you want loose in your body. Now, from there, we move on to the small intestine, which is the first region of the digestive tract after the stomach. So the small intestine has 3 regions. These are the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. So the pronunciation of this is going to be extremely localized in the scientific community. So if you are Canadian or British, it is the duodenum, or the the duodenum. And if you are American, it is a duodenum. The American pronunciation is, I learned it, duodenum, because the person who taught me all this stuff was from Vancouver. So there you go. So the duodenum is the first part of the small intestine, then the jejunum is the middle section, and the ileum is the final section that then dumps into the large intestine. And the main function here is going to be absorption, but a lot of chemical digestion does occur here as well. This is also going to be the site of fat emulsification and therefore the site of fat absorption into the body. So this is what the small intestine looks like. It has a lot of circular folds, a lot of surface area, and as soon as you look closer, there's more and more complicated structures designed to increase surface area. It is all about absorption in the small intestine. The more surface area, the better. So carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and nucleic acids are all broken down into their simplest forms in the digestive tract. Enzymes from the pancreas, the liver, and the small intestine itself all aid in this digestion. So the first is going to be bile, which we already talked about. It's produced in the liver, it's stored in the gallbladder, released into the small intestine, and it aids in emulsifying fats, which just means making enough fat mixed with the water. You need to mix fat with water in order to absorb it into your digestive system because our circulatory system is based on water. Here's a list of all the different enzymes used in digestion and the organs that produce them. So here you can see salivary glands, pancreas, and small intestine and stomach all secrete enzymes, but the lion's share is going to be coming from the small intestine and the pancreas. And most of that action is occurring in the small intestine. Yeah, so absorption primarily occurs in the small intestine. The exception to this is water, which tends to be primarily absorbed in the large intestine. There are pleated linings known as circular folds, and these are covered with little fingers called villi, which are in turn covered with tinier fingers called microvilli. Each villi is hypervascular, like it has a lot of blood vessels in it, and it also has a lot of lymphatic vessels associated with it. So the capillaries carry away the absorbed products of protein and carbohydrate digestion, and then they also carry away ions like electrolytes and water that is necessary for life. However, it is important again to note that the majority of water is going to be absorbed through capillaries in the large intestine, not in the small intestine. All right. Okay. All right. Then you have lacteals. So lacteals are designed to carry away products of fat digestion in the form of chylomicrons. Chylomicrons are a little emulsified fat products. They are coated in protein. That protein is from the gall, from the bile. And because of that, they are soluble in water. It's basically kind of made like a non-polar molecule. It's taken a polar molecule, attached it to a non-polar molecule, and created a large water-soluble molecule as a byproduct. So this is so here's the process by how that works. So for carbohydrates, our polysaccharides break down into disaccharides, which breaks down into monosaccharides, and then are directly absorbed as glucose or fructose into the circulatory system. Now, proteins, by contrast, break down to peptides, then to amino acids, and then absorbed through the same mechanism. Fats have to be emulsified with bile salts, and then those emulsified droplets are going to be metabolized into fatty acids and monoglycerides, and then form together into complexes known as micelles, which then can be absorbed through a chylomicron, and finally into the lacteal. And here's a chart that just reviews just all of that. So, this is a good chart to go and study. If you see green at the top, it's usually worth reading twice. Now, the liver is our king. We love the liver, but the liver actually is not as involved with digestion as a lot of other organs. So The liver produces bile for emulsifying fats, but it does not serve many other functions in digestion. Excess bile is stored in the gallbladder, where it is then released as needed into the duodenum. The duodenus is also going to be releasing glucagon and insulin into the small intestine from the pancreas. Now, so the pancreas also secretes a digestive complex of enzymes in addition to producing insulin and glucagon. So the pancreas will go and produce and release amylase, trypsin, lipase, and nuclease. The pancreatic juice is going to contain pretty much every digestive enzyme necessary to break down tissues. So don't get this on your boots. Pancreatic juice also includes a large amount of bicarbonate, which then neutralizes the acidity of the chyme coming from the stomach. This is important as it protects your digestive tract from getting, acid etched like a tire or a piece of glass. And then there is the pancreatic duct, which is just it's the covering. It's the connection between the bile duct and the small intestine, the duodenum. The liver is the largest internal organ, and it has what is known as a portal system. Basically, what that just means is because the liver is a filtration organ, it's going to pass all the blood in the body through it very regularly. And the capillary beds are then going to distribute this filtered blood regularly to the rest of the body. Like we need to go in transition between pressures. Otherwise, we're going to be destroying different sensitive systems. So the liver being hypervascular, it has a couple different portal systems. The first being the hepatic portal vein, which links the capillary bed of the villi in the small intestine to the capillary bed of the liver. This nutrient-labeled blood then needs to go and travel through the hepatic portal to be filtered before it can hit the rest of the body, as it's going to have some impurities and things that could be dangerous inside of it. All right, so the liver aids in bile. It aids in blood glucose level regulation. Like the pancreas is producing the enzyme, but it's being told what to do by the liver. And it helps package lipids with proteins through the emulsification process. Unassociated from the digestive tract, its main function is to remove toxins and poisons from the blood. If you don't have a liver, you start to get a condition known as jaundice, a yellowing of the skin, which is an accumulation of toxins in the body, and it can be very bad. Once the liver adjusts the composition of the blood to be appropriate for the rest of the body, the blood then gets dumped back into the general circulatory system. So looking here, you can see the very complex capillary bed inside of the liver and how it anchors directly to the absorption portion of the intestinal tract. Like this is connected to the entire large and small intestine. So this is where the nutrients are being absorbed, filtered, and then returned to the heart through the inferior vena cava. Disorders of the liver include cirrhosis. This can be inflammation. Basically, chronic inflammation of any tissue in the body is going to start replacing that tissue with scar tissue and little bits of fat. Cirrhosis is that process occurring on the liver. This condition is associated with alcohol composition. Basically, if the liver's having to work a lot, if the liver's getting irritated by whatever you're putting in your body, and in this case, alcohol is, it's going to be bypassing most of the mechanisms of digestion. It's going to start scarring up your liver. It's going to lose function. It's going to lose regenerative ability, and eventually you're going to get jaundice. You'll occasionally hear about fatty liver disease. If you're morbidly obese, fat can have a similar function. But we are talking morbidly obese. You typically don't see this in people who are still mobile and who still are, if you're drinking a couple liters of Coke a day, you might get fatty liver disease. If you are walking, if you just probably need to go and lose 15 pounds, you're not going to get fatty liver disease. So disorders of the liver. Oh yeah. There's also hepatitis. So there's a lot of different hepatitises. A lot of them are sexually transmitted, and a lot of them have variable levels of severity. But all of these are very dangerous and should be vaccinated against. So hepatitis is inflammation of the liver that is caused by one of 6 viruses: hepatitis A, hepatitis B, C, D, E, and G, with variable levels of mortality. When the liver stops filtering a chemical known as bilirubin from the blood, that leads to the yellowing of the skin, and that is how jaundice manifests. Yeah, results in jaundice, yellow tint to the skin and the whites of eyes. There was a really good picture on Reddit for a while. I do not know how I could find it again, but it showed a guy before and after he got a liver transplant and in the same pose. And we go from yellow to white dude. And like his eyes were almost orange. It was very impressive. Now, the gallbladder does not produce a lot. It is designed to store and release the bile as necessary. And as a result, it's muscular and shaped vaguely like a pear, which, if you're making a sack is a sack is a sack, right? All right. So occasionally, if you have a very high fat diet or certain genetic issues or a history with alcohol or extreme stress, you'll end up with something known as gallstones. So gallstones are cholesterol and a lot of other substances building up around an irritant inside of the gallbladder. These then form what is effectively a pearl that then clogs the gallbladder and keeps it from properly releasing bile. So surgically, gallstones can be removed, but if there are too many, they often have to remove the gallbladder, which leads to that person no longer being able to normally metabolize fat. If ignored, however, gallstones are often lethal, leading to life-threatening infections. These are what gallstones look like. And you see they try to round out basically to avoid cutting through the wall. So this is a evolutionary mechanism to try to protect the gallbladder from losing all function because a gallstone cut its way through the side. So the large intestine mainly absorbs water and vitamins, and as a site of bacterial fermentation, byproduct of a lot of that fermentation is a little bit of sugar, just because we don't have enough time with it, but a lot of vitamins. A lot of our essential vitamins are absorbed in the large intestine. So the large intestine can be divided into 4 different regions. We have the cecum, which is the first section. We have the colon, we have the rectum, and we have the anal canal. So looking here, at the end of the cecum, we have a structure called the appendix. So historically, or prehistorically, our taxa would have had a larger cecum because we would have been a lot more dependent on hindgut fermentation. Most primates that eat a lot of plant matter are hindgut fermenters. Gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, all our closest relatives are hindgut fermenters, and they tend to do it mainly in the cecum. Or have heavy amounts of hindgut fermentation. They're not obligate hindgut fermenters because they need fruit and meat and things. Anyway, but the point is, as we became more and more dependent on fire, as we became more and more dependent on cooking our food, we gradually lost our ability to ferment our food. The human digestive system cannot accommodate a raw food diet anymore because it has atrophied in large parts. And this is not something that can be reversed, as it is a evolutionary thing and not a adaptatory thing. You cannot make your appendix start working as a fermentation chamber for your cecum again. Anyway, but the point is, the appendix was previously an enlarged chamber of the cecum to aid in fermentation. As we developed alternative strategies that do not require fermentation, the cecum became a waste of calories and began to atrophy. This atrophied section is known as the appendix. Now, this did not lose function, however. The appendix is what recultures your hindgut with all the bacteria that can help with fermentation and vitamin release and all the good stuff. If you undergo a medical condition that leads to the large intestine losing its microbes. So anytime you have diarrhea, your large intestine is emptying itself. And in doing so, it's killing most of the bacteria that are inside of the large intestine. Now, it is usually doing this to go and try to stop a bad bacteria, but it does hurt the good bacteria populations. The good bacteria can be repopulated from the appendix, and then those people can recover faster from digestive illnesses. In the pre-industrial world, this was essential because diarrhea often led to death by dehydration. So the faster you can recover after undergoing an event like that, the better. So the cecum is a pouch at the junction of the small and large intestines. The appendix extends from the cecum and it has no digestive function, but it does have an immune function, namely recolonizing your digestive tract with healthy bacteria. Now, appendicitis occurs when there is inflammation of the appendix. It could be caused by many things, intestinal blockages, but at the end of the day, it means the appendix is being blocked and the contents are starting to rot as a byproduct. So this can be treated with antibiotics, but surgical removal of the appendix is also pretty common. And on a modern diet, lacking the appendix tends not to have too many repercussions. As long as you cook your food and you aren't trying to survive off of raw fruits and like raw meat, you're going to be fine. And if you are trying to do that, you're not going to be fine, even if you have a good appendix. So here's the appendix itself. It's a very small structure. And this is after the excision is done. This is an apectodectomy. So they cut off circulation to the rest of the organ to avoid bleeding. They sever the organ, and then they patch the hole. This is much less dangerous than doing surgery on the stomach because you do not have the worry of the acid saturation. Now, while there are 4 regions of the colon, for some reason, there are only 3 structures that we talk about. And that is the ascending colon, the transverse colon, and the descending colon. So your digestive tract, what this basically just means is the chyme is going to be sent into a giant horseshoe shape up towards your body before it descends towards your rectum. Absorb water and ions, contain beneficial bacteria that make important vitamins, and ultimately store the feces. The entire thing is managed through peristaltic contractions. However, the last section, the anal canal, whenever your rectum reaches a certain capacity, that is when you have to go to the bathroom. When you are feeling like you have to poop, it is because your rectum is sending nervous signals. The saturation of the large intestine before the rectum, your body will not interpret. It doesn't like feel what's inside there. You don't start to feel things until it gets to your rectum. From there, that stimulates the rectal reflex, which moves the feces into the anal canal. Now, in order to go to the bathroom, there are 3 sphincters that need to relax. 2 sphincters that need to relax. The first is the internal sphincter, and this happens automatically. And this is part of the defecation reflex. When the poop is moving from your rectum to your anal canal, that's because this internal sphincter relaxed. And then we have our external sphincter, which is the very outside of your butthole. This is the only one that you can voluntarily control. So the anal cavity can be completely saturated with fecal matter, and you can just be holding it in a little bit. Not to be crass, but if someone's turtling, that's what's happening. All right. And here's a little video that follows these processes. Yeah. Oh, by the way, these videos, they do have audio. If you want to hear the audio, you can go straight into the presentation. But in general, the captions match one for one, so you can just read your way through these if you don't feel it. All right, so there you go. Something that is worth mentioning though is if they did not mention the majority of the water is absorbed in the large intestine. The majority of vitamins are absorbed in the large intestine. Electrolytes are reclaimed in the large intestine. So it has more functions than just compacting shit. Disorders of the colon. So diarrhea, rapid pass through of material, not enough water has been absorbed. Alternatively, constipation, too much water has been absorbed and material is not moving through fast enough. Either of these can become extreme disorders that require hospitalization, and either of these can be lethal, but both of them are pretty easily treated within a medical setting. So it's not really a danger if you have access to medicine. End of the day, though, the solution to both of these is about the same. Drink a shit ton of water, get your electrolytes, and get some sleep. So there's also, oh, this is interesting. So along the lining of the intestinal wall, there can be pouch structures known as diverlicula. So apparently they do not normally cause problems. However, they can become infected and undergo inflammation. I'd never heard of these structures before I looked at this slide, so that's why I'm kind of interested in it. At a guess, this seems to go and be a mechanical disorder that ultimately can result, kind of like getting a skin tag that then gets infected when you scratch it. Colorectal cancer begins with the formation of polyps, which are tiny little like wart-like projections on the wall of the large intestine. They are capable of turning cancerous. So they're about equivalent to a mole on your skin. A mole could be cancer or it could just be a mole. So typically, you will undergo a sigmoid colonoscopy, which is where they just examine the last portion of your large intestine. They just do the descending colon. Or you can go in for a whole colonoscopy, which is where the entire colon is examined. This is advised when you hit about 40, if you're a man. Men tend to go and get these a lot more often than women. It is presumed due to individual dietary preferences between individuals, because we've also noticed that there are extreme regional differences depending on diet. My thought around it probably has something to do with, like, I don't know if people still do this. When I was a kid, I remember there were people who legit thought eating vegetables was unmanly and they would only eat meat and bread. Those people probably need a colonoscopy once a year. Normal people eat fiber, and fiber is important for dealing with your polyps. Eat your vegetables. Yeah. Here's a divericulum. It's just a little formation of tissue that can accumulate waste. And then when it accumulates waste, that can rot, and then that can cause an infection. So enzymes need to occur for digestion to occur. Most of our digestion is chemical, but they have to be at the right place and the right time, because everything they're trying to digest is the same shit that we're made of. If I am trying to digest proteins, I need to be careful because I'm mostly made of proteins, right? So nerves and hormones control regulate the release of these enzymes. Nerve responses are instantaneous because they're electrical. Hormones take an extended period of time because they're based off of liquid. Salivation is also controlled by the nervous system. Uh, it basically is another water management system. You salivate more during eating and before eating. You salivate less when you're not eating. However, salivation is also important for the health of the teeth, because your spit constantly going over your teeth is going to be cleaning away most of the food particulates and sugars before your toothbrush has a chance to get to it. The toothbrush is to take care of the stuff that you missed and the stuff that would become a cavity in an unfortunate area. Neural control is significantly faster and tends to work best, but chemical control will last for a lot longer. So we use both in our bodies. Now, the release of gastric juice is controlled by the nervous system. You'll notice the nervous system is more important for anything involving acidity, because a quick response is important. If you've already flooded your small intestine with acid, you don't have time to wait for a hormone to arrive to tell the sphincter to close. So, the release of gastric juice, the release of acid, is actually hormonally controlled, like within the stomach, not the sphincters. Sorry, acid reflux. Haven't eaten yet today. Okay, so gastrin is a hormone that says release a lot of digestive acids. We have things inside of us. It is stimulated when it is stimulated to be released by distension of the stomach. As the stomach gets more and more filled, it's going to go and trigger the release of more and more gastrin, which is in turn going to trigger the release of more and more digestive fluid until the stomach capacity starts to be reduced again because it's all going to go and be getting melted and digested. So the release of enzymes and bile from the small intestines, pancreas, gallbladder, all that area, is going to be triggered largely by neural reflexes, which makes sense because emulsification of fat is going to be centered around a single duct at the beginning of the longest portion of your GI tract. You need to make sure it's getting where it needs to be when it needs to get there. Hormones released by the SI. So no clue. I think this is just the localized tissue, the digestive tract. This is going to include vasoactive intestinal peptide, secretin, and cholecystokinin. So, yeah, this is why I don't like acronyms and a lot of the time. It's so if you don't know what the acronym is, you're out. You're out. Here we are. And here's the chart that just covers everything that we just talked about. So these are the stimuli and what effect this triggers through hormonal or electric mechanisms, neural mechanisms. So here you can see the four hormones, the site of origin, stomach, small intestine, what stimuli causes them to be triggered, and what their target and effects are. Now, planning a healthy diet can be done in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of healthy ways to eat. Now, My Plate is an okay tool. It works off the logic of this was developed in part by Michelle Obama a while ago. Let's see. We're going to stop the share for a second because I want to go and show you, draw something. So the My Plate model focused around the idea that it's a food pyramid's pretty much worthless. People don't know how to turn that into actual food values. So My Plate instead made a pie chart, and the pie chart is supposed to represent your dinner plate. So within Michelle Obama's recommendations, which were supported, which I call it Michelle Obama, she was just the face of the program. It was actually being directed by, like the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So within this framework, we typically are looking at what humans are adapted to eat and then what's available within our markets. So ideally, you should be eating about 25% meat, 25% starch sources. So this will be your protein source, your starch. And then down here is going to be 50% of your diet should be rough, dark green vegetables. So the important here, so I realize now on Zoom that that's reversed for some reason. I don't know why, but you should ideally be eating 50% dark leafy greens, fresh greens, things like that. This is going to be your broccoli, your spinach, your kale, anything that's fiber rich, vitamin rich, not very calorie rich. Protein, it's ideal to get that from lean sources. Because even a lean source is still going to have enough animal protein to meet your needs, or animal fats to meet your needs. Any fat above that is just going to start leading to cardiac issues, and you don't want to deal with that. It's not your business. And then finally, 25% should be supplemented through starch. So that's going to be where your carbohydrates are going to come from. You'll notice that this doesn't include any section for sugar. So in theory, naturally, you should not be eating sugar except as an extremely rare treat. So most pre-industrial diets do not include sweeteners, simply because they were only available to the wealthy elite. So sugar is like the most unnatural thing in our diet. you all need to be eating a lot more fiber than you are. Everyone needs to eat more fiber than they. I personally am not following this just because, quite frankly, I'm poor and depressed. I need to get closer to this. This is the goal. And with that, let's continue our presentation. All right. So there are a lot of different ways to go and hit your requirements in order to hit those generalizations. A starch could be anything from cassava flour to wheat flour to potatoes to there's a lot of different options there. Rice. And then the majority of your vegetables that are not like a starchy vegetable are going to go and be very nutrient dense and can go and fill half that plate. Fruits are very nutrient dense, but they also can be very sugar dense and very acidic. So in general, my advice for fruits is when you're actually don't have fruit with dinner. I personally try to go and slip in my fruits in lunches and breakfast and like evening things like desserts. I eat a lot of fruits for desserts, like or with desserts. And but in general, like you don't really need the fruits. You could just do vegetables. So vegetables, and then the grains and proteins. This is where me and Michelle disagree a bit. I think you need 25% protein. But you can get that from plant sources, so you can go and have a mixture of like lean fish and lentils and peas and garbanzo beans and hummus, and there's a lot of options. And then finally, so we recommend dairy products for two reasons. One, it is the cheapest source of dietary protein in the United States of America. If you are poor and you need dietary protein, you can get dairy. We do not, these proteins are whole proteins, which means they have every protein that we need. However, we run into a couple issues here for a couple of reasons. One, dairy is naturally very high in fat. Butter may have all the nutrients that you need for your proteins, but it's also mostly just a wad of fat. So low fat sources are the healthiest. I personally use whole milk because it tastes better, and whole milk is only 2% or it's only 3 or 4%, so it doesn't really make much of a difference. If you can eat dairy, it's a good option for low fat protein input. If you cannot eat dairy, lean fishes, lean meats, and in a general preference for vegetable matter will suit you equally as well. So so one of the main commissions on this is the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, which includes scientists from all around the world, a lot of nutritional experts, and they use make evidence-based recommendations that people should eat rather than focusing on the micronutrients of the food. The idea behind this is it needed to be simple, it needed to be vernacular, namely, it needed to be able to be understood by the common people, and it needed to be applicable. You can't just tell people to start a Mediterranean diet because, sure, yeah, I'm going to go and start buying and eating nothing but sea bass in the middle of Fresno, like no. So it's all about thinking in a local mindset. What's available around you? What needs do you need to accommodate? Like for instance, when I moved to Fresno, I started cooking almost exclusively Mexican food because I lived next to Vallarta's and it was the cheapest source of groceries for me. And it worked really well. I lost weight. I became a lot more healthy because I was just eating large amounts of agricultural products. I was making all my own food. I wasn't adding sugars. It was going pretty well. And now I live off of Popeyes, and I'm probably going to be dead within a year. A couple of the biggest recommendations though are minimize your animal fat intake, maximize your protein intake, and lean, and honestly just if you can keep those two philosophies in there while still acknowledging that you do need dietary protein. It's also worth acknowledging that you cannot survive off a raw food diet, and being vegan or vegetarian is incredibly difficult to do right and should be done with consultation of a medical expert. It's possible. It's very doable, but it has to be done in a very specific way or you're going to start getting a lot of disorders. And it's just, I mean, there's a lot of resources on it, so use them. Sugar is the devil. We hate sugar. All my homies hate sugar. Everyone cool hates sugar. Only bitches like sugar. Sugar is bad for us. It is the largest nutrient that is an issue for human health. Before sugar entered our diet, obesity was a rare phenomenon. Even high fat diets, a lot of the traditional European diets, for instance, rely heavily on animal fats, did not have a lot of health repercussions compared to the amount of sugar being put in. But it's also worth noting that they also weren't eating as much animal fats because they weren't eating a lot of meats. Most of their proteins were coming from dairy. So the best way to adjust for our region, our diet, the Central Valley area, we have pretty cheap dairy products because we have a pretty big dairy industry. Agricultural products like produce is going to be very variable, so you'll have to bounce around a bit and switch it up pretty much constantly to go and make sure you're getting the best deals. And focus on lean meats with an emphasis on fish. Honestly, it's pretty hard to find true lean meat in an American marketplace at this point. Uh, so I eat white fish a couple times a week. That's my main health thing that I do, and it helps a lot. My blood pressure and sugars are down, and I think that if you cut out sugar and you just focus on eating as much leafy greens and lean protein as you can, you basically have the perfect human diet. You could carbohydrates arguably could also be cut out of the formula, but the thing is, it's carbohydrate. It's kind of hard on the gut to be getting all your calories from protein, so you do need a little bit of carbohydrates just to kind of float you through and avoid damaging your digestive tract. Yeah, so ideally, the grain portion is larger in American models because we have subsidized grain industries, and therefore the cheapest, most readily available calories of it are going to be grain based. So they emphasize whole grains because they're more fiber rich. This is emphasized because if we're being true to nutrition, you shouldn't really be eating a lot of grains at all. This should be closer to like an eighth of a plate. And then vegetables should replace what was missing there. Dairy, again, this is more important if you're a kid, like you're growing very fast, or if you're trying to supplement your calories or your proteins. Dairy's a pretty good source that I think you could consider pretty equivalent to other lean protein sources. Like there's some lean poultry that you can get your hands on. Turkey tends to be leaner. A lot of pork cuts are pretty lean, but you have to go and do your homework to figure out which ones it is. And honestly, just look at the marbling on each piece of meat you buy. Just be a bit more present when you're buying your groceries, and you'll do fine. Food provides fuel, building blocks, and the molecules needed to carry out chemical reactions alongside water. The digestive system breaks down all these molecules into subunits that are then absorbed and then put to work in the body. However, we are then able to reassemble those molecules into more complicated molecules to repair systems inside of us. However, there are some nutrients that we cannot synthesize. They have to be absorbed complete from outside of the body. So if you ever hear of the essential amino acids are amino acids that we have to digest. We cannot synthesize them. So a couple of vitamins are like this too. Vitamin C needs to be absorbed whole inside of our primate digestive system. Primates and rodents need vitamin C. Every other animal can produce their own. So now I think it would be worth it to talk about the three macronutrients. So we have lipids, which are fats, we have carbohydrates, and then we have proteins. So lipids have about 9 calories a gram. This is going to include all the fats. This is butter. This is olive oil. This is canola oil. If it's a fat, it's an oil, or cholesterol, it's a lipid. So saturated fats are solid at room temperature because of their chemical structure. And as a byproduct within our body, they are more inclined to go and create blockages in our circulatory system. Unsaturated fats are liquid at room temperature, and most of the plant oils are unsaturated fats, the exception being coconut fat. Now, coconut oil and animal fat should be minimized in intake, They can be very rough on your cardiac system. Instead, lean towards other types of oils. And when you have to use a solid oil for a recipe, just try to go and be a little conservative about how you do it. Like I use less butter than they tend to advise me when I'm cooking, and I love butter. Trans fats are another class of fats that are partially synthetic. Trans fats should not be in a human diet. They are they have been proven to have negative impacts on our health. They are used because they're slightly more shelf stable than unsaturated fats, but it does lead to the trans fats that are added to our food to stabilize it is also one of the main leading causes of obesity in the United States. Sugar is the main issue, but there are bad forms of fats that have been modified. And at the end of the day, everything in moderation, right? So here we have a saturated fat and trans fats. Both raise the risk of atherosclerosis and heart disease. Most of the fat in the diet should be monosaturated, polyunsaturated, or omega-3. So polyunsaturated are going to be your corn oil, sunflower oils. Monosaturated are canola, olive oil, peanut oil. And then omega-3 are animal fats, but a very specific class of animal fats that tend to be found mainly in fish. And they tend to be more liquidy at a room temperature. It's especially common in fish from cold waters because in part it is a liquid at room temperature because it is a de-icer. It keeps their blood from freezing. Carbohydrates have less than half of the calories per gram of a lipid. However, because of that, carbohydrates are much easier to eat a large volume of. I could very easily eat a chunk of mashed potatoes the size of a stick of butter. I don't think I could eat a stick of butter. So carbohydrates tend to be emphasized in our diet because as an agrarian society, it's the easiest calorie to produce. However, pre-agriculture, like 10,000 years ago, it would have been maybe 15% of the diet. And 10,000 years is nothing in evolutionary time. You are not designed to eat large amounts of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates should be an important part of your diet, but not a large part. Carbohydrates aid in moderating insulin release because insulin is there to regulate the absorption of sugars and the processing of carbs in your body. So, the carbs are then going to in turn be influencing the insulin because it's responding to it. And the primary function is just to provide energy and to keep from having to break down building blocks in order to burn them for energy. Metabolizing pure protein for all your calories will actually go and lead to a lot of weird conditions, including accumulation of toxins in your blood. This is in part why the keto diet is very toxic. It induces a medical condition known as ketosis, which is basically acetone starts to form in your blood. And you'll actually notice someone on the keto diet, if you smell their breath, it smells a bit like paint thinner. Fiber is a type of carbohydrate that cannot be broken down. This is going to be our cellulose. This is where that fermentation I was talking about earlier comes in. So if we were a rhino or a horse or a cow, we have big chambers in our bodies that allow bacteria to break down cellulose fibers into like nutrients and release them as sugars. We can't do that, but the fiber is super important to our digestive function. Fiber breaks away polyps that are bad, and also it reduces the frequency of polyps. It reduces the incidence of every type of cancer. It aids in your digestion. It helps you lose weight. The only downside is it makes you poop a couple times a day. I mean, eat your fiber. The last words of my great aunt to my father on her deathbed before she died was, "Everyone in this damn family needs to eat more fiber." So there are two types of carbohydrates. You have your simple carbohydrates made out of the monomers, and then you have your complex carbohydrates that like your starches. So simple carbohydrates are going to be your sugars, the super sweet small stuff. Complex carbohydrates, we have bread here. We have a bunch of different fruits and vegetables. Most of the fresh vegetables and fruits have a lot of carbs in them. Fruits actually have more simple sugars in them, than carbs oftentimes, but because they have so much fiber, the health benefits tend to balance out. Now, proteins are chains of amino acids, and they provide 4 calories per gram, same as the carbohydrates. So our body is made out of proteins. 9 of the 20 amino acids used to make proteins, we cannot make ourselves, and we have to get from our diet. So because of this, we do require a lot more protein than most other primates. Like, we naturally are omnivorous, living off of lean meat, shit ton of green vegetables, and small amounts of carbohydrates as seeds or roots. Now, complete proteins contain all the essential amino acids, and this is going to include the majority of animal sources, with 1 or 2 very rare exceptions. Incomplete proteins include the majority of plant sources. This is in part why it's important to do your research if you're going to become a vegetarian, because you will need multiple types of plants to get to a complete protein, and you need to figure out what type of plants those are. Animal sources, if you eat an animal, it's going to have the proteins you need. So meat and dairy can just be lumped into a this'll work category. It's just a lot more complicated to be a vegetarian and a lot more expensive. Complementary proteins are combinations of incomplete proteins that also supply all of the essential amino acids. So complementary proteins would be like, I eat chickpeas and I eat lentils, because together they have all the essential amino acids. That is not true, by the way. Don't use that as your dietary guide. But I would just be figuring out what combination of plants hits all the essential amino acids. So all of these are incomplete sources over here, but if they're eaten together, they form a complete source. And over here, each of these individually is a complete source of all the essential amino acids. Yeah. So here are just a couple different vegetable sources of proteins. The legumes are very protein rich. Nuts and seeds tend to be pretty fat and protein rich. Grains are very carb rich. Between these 3, you could make a decent diet. It would be rough. And that is what we call the medieval peasant diet, because your diet's mainly peas, lentils, and grain. Now, vitamins, you need very, very small amounts. They tend to serve as enzymes or coenzymes in operations, and they can be divided into the water-soluble and the lipid-soluble vitamins. Water-soluble vitamins, you can have as much as you want. Any excess is just urinated out. Lipid-soluble vitamins, you need to be more careful with, because if you have too many, they will bond to your body fat and they will start to poison you like a heavy metal. So the amounts are very specific. Minerals are inorganic substances that we need for a variety of life processes. The most common that I can think of is calcium. We need a lot of calcium in our diets to maintain healthy skeletons. And crustaceans also need calcium to do the same thing. So, that's where we tend to get that from our protein sources. They also tend to be pretty calcium rich as well. And then, of course, water. Water does everything, but it is usually more of a media for chemical reactions than being involved. Here's a list of all the different fat and water-soluble vitamins, where they're produced and what functions they have, and what dietary sources you can get them from. You'll notice there's a lot of fresh vegetables, a lot of different types of proteins, and it's pretty widely distributed in different types of food. One of the keys to doing this is, after you make your general categories, like Our Lady of Mercy, Michelle Obama, you need to go and start figuring out. You need to try to vary up the contents of each of those categories as much as possible, as often as possible. Yes, you need half your plate to be greens. It can't be the same green every night. Tonight you have asparagus, tomorrow you have broccoli, then maybe, I don't know, cauliflowers and Brussels sprouts. Why not a spinach salad? And here are some select minerals, got cals. A lot of the elements are going to go in bean. All these tend to be elemental. Now, when you're choosing foods, there's a lot of different philosophies. I think I've gone over most of them so far. But it is important to increase important nutrients while limiting harmful substances. and avoiding excess in all things. You can make anything bad by having too much of it. Serving size is described on the label of a container. You shouldn't really exceed one serving size, but it's also worth keeping a calculator in your head for the following. If you are a woman, you typically need around 1,600 calories a day. If you're a man, you typically need around 1,800. We're very sedentary as people. The 2000 figure, it was from when we were more agrarian. So in general, you also can go and put in your activity and fitness levels into online calculators, along with your height, race, age, that sort of stuff. And it'll tell you your caloric needs for a day. And as long as you're hitting those parameters with maximum amount of variety, you are keeping the healthiest diet possible. Try to have more plant fats, honestly. Just try to minimize the amount of animal fat you take in. Aim for leaner meats. If you're gonna have fatty meat, make it a treat. Do it as something special. I love myself a fatty steak, but I'm only gonna have one every month-ish for like big events, birthdays, that sort of thing. But yeah, the 2000 calorie diet was the standard for a very long time. But that also was assuming that y'all are rolling out of bed and getting on the plow. We don't do that anymore, really. We roll out of bed, we get on the TikTok plow, and then we plow our way through hundreds of hours of 9-second videos, right? So we need a lot less calories because most of the work we tend to do requires you to be stationary and focused on a topic at this point. Mind you, I also went from that to being a rancher to back to being a zookeeper to this. So it really just comes down to personal evaluation of your energy levels and what you do, you know? This is a nutrient label. These are your different fat categories, and you're going to go and want to. So saturated fat, trans fat, you want to limit those. Cholesterol, you want to limit those. And sodium. Sodium can really extremely vary your blood pressure. And in general, in the West, we tend to eat an excessive amount of sodium because it's used as a preservative in foods. So try to minimize your salt intake. Dietary fiber, maximize that some bitch. Your protein, there are protein calculators, so try to hit that parameter. And then your vitamins. For each vitamin, you pretty much have to kind of look it up. If you take a generic multivitamin once a day, it tends to cover most of these concerns as long as you are still trying to eat vegetables sometimes. Yeah. So you'll notice how a 2,500 calories is another value that they use. This would be like, I'm 6'4". I work out every day. I'm on the plow. I'm hauling buckets of stuff. I do this like 6, 7, 8 hours a day, homie. That would be 2,500. I'm 6'2" and I sit most of the day. I probably burn 1,800 calories. So the basal metabolic rate is the minimal amount of energy to keep an awake, resting human body alive. So your basal metabolic rate would be like if I have you lie down on a floor in a chamber and then I measure the CO2 from your respiration to figure out how many calories you're burning in like an hour. It's 60 to 75% of the body's energy needs. And of that, about of these portions, about 4/5 of each of these fractions is going to be used strictly for maintaining body heat. Most of our calories go to maintaining our body heat. Men have higher BMRs just because muscle burns more energy than fat does, and men tend to have the effect of testosterone just makes muscles thicken and become more numerous and more widespread. And there's also the fact that men just tend to be larger than women. But end of the day, it's going to go and vary based off of your exercise levels, your body conditions, your fitness goals, and your personal proportions and genetic history. It is important to note that as you get older, like steadily from about 20 onwards, your metabolism starts to slowly decline and you will need less and less calories, and you also will be slowly losing muscle mass. Of course, this can be countered with exercise and careful diet, but it is an inevitability of death that your metabolism is going to slow to a stop, right? So keep that in your things, right? BMR. So your basal metabolic rate is the calories used in physical. Okay, here we go. So your basic metabolic rate plus the amount of calories you use in your physical activity is the total amount of calories that you need to consume to maintain a stable weight in a day. That's going to vary a lot. And really, what you more are going to be seeing is kind of an internal fluctuation of about 5 pounds, like depending, kind of waving through the year. Like gain 5 pounds, lose 5 pounds, gain 5 pounds, lose 5 pounds pretty regularly for like a 200-pound gentleman like myself. It's impossible to get the exact numbers because it's impossible to get to do the exact same thing every day in the exact same way. But these can be useful for figuring out your ballpark goals and then adjusting as you go. So exercise, important to keep the body in good working order. The body's not wasteful. If you don't do something, you're going to lose the mechanisms to be able to do it. When was the last time you climbed a tree? And do you think you still could? I couldn't. I probably need to run more and climb and shit. And then dietary guidance for Americans. Uh, it's advised that you get at least 2.5 hours of moderate intensity physical activity a week. So this isn't like walking or like this isn't going to go and be if you're doing like weight training to failure, that's intense exercise. If you're going on a jog, that is moderate intensity. If you are going on a walk, that is not moderate intensity, that's low intensity. So you also can get away with 5 hours of low intensity exercise. If you just walk around for a total of 5 hours a week, that's enough to keep you healthy in general. Although I would again advise doing some sort of weight training for everyone just to keep the mobility of your limbs. Because that's one of the first things that goes away when people get older. Aerobic exercise, anything that gets the heart rate up, is good for the heart. It will go and lower your blood pressure as a net. You pretty much want to stay at 80% of your maximum heart rate, which you can calculate online, during the course of your exercise. Weight bearing exercises, so weight training, that's going to reduce the risk of osteoporosis because weight lifting increases the density of your bones and the strength of your bones and the longevity of your bones. Weightlifting is super good for your skeletal system, but you shouldn't be trying to push records. Shouldn't be trying to break your PR. You should always be using proper form. In general, if you weightlifting for health and weightlifting for performance look very different, and it's important to go in with the right attitude when you're designing your routines. In case you can tell, I was certified as a trainer and nutritionist at one point. Now, regular physical exercise is also shown to reduce stress. Humans, again, we adapted for a very specific way of life over millions and millions of years, and we kind of changed it up completely in the last 10,000. And we've been kind of dealing with that since. You're supposed to spend most of your day walking around, digging through stuff, looking for stuff, or chasing down things. Like you should be moving most of the day. And part of why we're so stressed and unhappy is because our cities aren't designed to enable this movement. Like you have to take a car to get around. I used public transit to get around in Fresno for a couple of years. It doubled the length of my working day. It was exhausting. So designing a walkable city is one of the quickest ways to address the exercise needs because everybody will end up walking enough if they have to walk to get to the grocery store, walk to get to work, And if you make it easy for them to do that walking, then they don't even see it as a burden. Also is good for socialization, integration, just makes people less pissed if they see other types of people when they go about their day instead of hiding in their huts, like city design's a big factor in this. But the point is, we are designed to be constantly moving, constantly foraging, constantly thinking, constantly trying to make things. We tend to have a psychological dysfunction as a byproduct of not meeting those needs. So, be mindful of your body and think of yourself like an animal. If you were in your natural environment, what would you need and what would you want? Obesity is considered an eating disorder, but to be honest, it's more of a it's more of a cultural, it's more of a result of government mismanagement. So so there are instances of obesity that directly result from an eating disorder, usually overeating or excess eating or eating too frequently or bad composition of diet. But that used to be pretty rare. It's becoming the majority of adults are now obese in the US because our food supply is designed to be shelf stable for an extremely long time. And that is going, and we also want our food to be pretty addictive. So they add sugar and fats to go and try to make it tastier. And even if you're not overeating and you're eating what your body is designed to say is the appropriate amount, you're still going to be overeating because one bite is like 10,000 calories or whatever. Another eating disorder. So that's, I would argue that's more of a cultural issue than a psychological issue in those cases, which I think is the majority of cases. Now, anorexia nervosa, it's an eating disorder and it's a form of self-starvation. This one tends to be a bit more cultural as well. It's most common in women. But it's associated with any demographic that is under extreme scrutiny for their physical appearance. We've found anorexia appears in models, both male and female. It's common in teenage girls. It shows up among certain ethnic groups in Southeast Asia. There's actually a high incidence of male occurrence in certain countries in the Middle East because there's a big stigma around male obesity. It's a very cultural phenomenon. It's important to note that there are never universal norms for behavior. It's always your regional cultural behavior. Another eating disorder is bulimia. This one's interesting because it is one of the few eating disorders that is reasonably universal. Binge eating and then vomiting from the binge eating or because they are inducing vomiting is common in a lot of different animals, including humans. The most common form is eating until sickness and then vomiting. This is in humans and in the West. It's typically a psychological disorder that needs to be addressed as opposed to a cultural or an evolutionary disorder. Anxious depression is heavily associated with this because binge eating is an impulsive behavior designed to release a certain amount of dopamine. So the person tends to be unhappy, and if they're anxious, they are more inclined to impulsive behavior, and that's kind of how we look at things like this in general. And that's where this diagnosis would have come from, at least according to. I took this from the American Journal of Psychology because I wanted to be safe, but there are many negative effects on the body of anorexia nervosa. Starving yourself, every system in your body is going to start breaking down. Your body is going to break down muscle before it starts breaking down the fat, which I always found very ironic. You're most likely going to become sterile, low body weight, and then your skeleton is going to become demineralized and you're going to start getting a lot of bone breaks. Oh, yeah. Along with any other disease associated with frequent vomiting, bulimia also leads to deterioration of the teeth and gums. You'll often, when you pair that with, if you have a bulimic who also is starving themselves, like they're also anorexic, like they'll binge, they vomit, then they don't eat again for a couple of days. They tend to lose all their teeth very quickly. The bones and the teeth are depleted of calcium, like before anything else, nutritionally. Alrighty, so learning goal wise, you should be able to describe the full passage of food from the mouth to the butt. You should understand the function of all the organs, including the peripheral organs. You should have a pretty good sense of how hormones work, and you should be able to design a viable, healthy diet that you could be able to either through the MyPlate model or more realistically within your local environment. I would suggest, just just taking a look at your fridge and thinking about what you eat and kind of putting things into that frame. I think one of the greatest human preoccupations you can have is trying to secure your own food supply. Oh, wait, let's just make sure there's no other pages. I think there might be one more. Oh yeah, here we are. I want you to be able to state the dietary value of lipids, carbs, proteins, vitamins, minerals, and water, like why they're all there. List the information found on a food label and explain what everything is. And then finally, explain how the body uses energy and what happens to excess calories. And, you should be able to explain how we become fat. All right, cool. So that is the last slide. So with that, folks, I think I'm going to go and stop here. Make sure to go and double check the syllabus schedule and all our content. This week, we are having a discussion. So make sure you go and fill that out. We haven't done one of those before. Yeah, and I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful week.